Thank you, Your Highness, for hosting me today. It's an honor and a privilege to be here with you all. Now, my name is Matthew Griffin. I'm the CEO and founder of the 311 Institute, a futures and deep futures think tank working with the world's most respected brands, as well as all G20 governments to help them understand and envision the next 50 years. And in this particular presentation, I'm going to take you all through the world of blockchain. In later presentations, we're going to be having conversations about the future of cryptocurrencies, NFTs, and then eventually, of course, the Metaverse. Now, Vitalik Buterin is the co-founder of an open source blockchain platform called Ethereum. You have probably heard of it. Now, I think this quote that he said a number of years ago actually sums up perfectly the power and potential of blockchain. Decentralize everything. Now, what he means by that, unsurprisingly, is that we can use blockchain and other distributed ledger technologies to decentralize the vast majority of industries, as well as products and services that we use today and in the future. Now, blockchain is what we call a general purpose technology. It is also a slow burning megatrend. And the reason why it's a slow burning megatrend is because we are trying to essentially change the entire fabric of the entire digital world. So that obviously takes a lot of time. Now, when we think of general purpose technologies, a general purpose technology is a technology that has cross-sector relevance and that can be innovated on top of in an almost unlimited way. So, for example, other general purpose technologies, there are about 24, include emerging technologies such as 3D printing, 5G, artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, as well as robotics, virtual reality, augmented reality, as well as even things like brain-machine interfaces. Now, we're not going to be talking through all of these, but when we start combining all of these general purpose technologies, we can do some amazing things. For example, if we combine blockchain with artificial intelligence, we can start decentralizing and democratizing artificial intelligence in new ways. But that's a conversation for another time. Now, when we have a look at the speed of change, one of the things basically that gets a lot of people is just how fast the world is actually changing today. And this kind of leads us into these conversations that we have about VUCA. The VUCA world, where the world is increasingly fast, uncertain, ambiguous, complex, and all these other kinds of things. Now, when we have a look at the speed of change, it actually has a relevance to blockchain in this particular example I'm going to be talking about. So if we step back 100 or so years ago, it would have taken around, in this case, in the TV's case, 75 years to reach 50 million people. Pokemon Go reached the same number of people in 19 days. Call of Duty did it in a week. However, in June of 2019, Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook, as they were known then, created a new cryptocurrency called Libra. It was tied to a basket of different currencies and everything else. And bearing in mind that our world is increasingly digital and connected, we have 3.5 billion people in the world connected today. Had Mark Zuckerberg been allowed to release Libra into the Facebook platform, which has 2.5 billion people, then in the words of the chairman of the People's Bank of China, the European Central Bank, the Bank of England, and the US Federal Reserve, he could have changed the state's control of money and the global financial system overnight, which means in a day. And just to sort of bring the power of this through to you, we live in an age today where an individual entrepreneur, provided they can hit all of the right levers, can create a product today. And if they can execute properly, and that's always the big question, they could have that new digital product in the hands of 100, 200, 300, 400, 500 million consumers within hours, even 1 billion. So the speed of change is rapidly accelerating, so much so that we can already envisage a time where we can disrupt global industries at speeds that would have been unimaginable 20 years ago, let alone even 10 years ago. And of course, Libra was based on blockchain, and it's now evolved to Diem out of Switzerland. So what is blockchain? So blockchain, put simply, is just a chain of blocks that contain data. So I have block 1 with data in it, block 2 with data in it, block 3 with data in it, and so on ad infinitum. It's also what we call a distributed digital ledger or a distributed ledger technology, DLT. Blockchain isn't the only game in town, but it's the one that the vast majority of people, funnily enough, talk about. Now, how does blockchain work? So blockchain actually works in a relatively straightforward way. So I create a new block, I put data into that block, that data has a unique, immutable ID, a hash, so that's like its own unique fingerprint that cannot be changed unless you can conduct something called a 51% attack. That data is then stored together in a block. That block is then sent out to a peer-to-peer network to validate. They validate the information in that block and they validate the block itself. And then they put that block on the end of the blockchain with all the other blocks. And it's incredibly difficult to invalidate an entire blockchain because every subsequent block knows the unique ID of the block in front of it. So the only way that we can change information in one block further up the chain is by conducting a 51% attack, where we actually take over 51% of the computing power of the peer-to-peer network. And as these chains get bigger, while these attacks have actually taken place, they're very difficult to perform, even in the age of quantum computers. Now, from a benefits perspective, blockchain has plenty of benefits, but there are some caveats. So firstly, it's efficient and fast. It does guzzle energy, and when we talk about fast, it's not as fast as some of the other processing systems, but we have a huge number of entrepreneurs and innovators actually working on that problem now. We have the red herring blockchain out of Australia that can do 400,000 TPS, for example. So it's a problem that's being solved. Blockchain offers organizations instant traceability, which is very handy when it comes to pretty much anything, especially supply chains. There is no central intermediary, so for example, we can use blockchain in the financial services community to disintermediate the global SWIFT network that over 10,000 banks actually used to transfer payments across it. We have a secure and encrypted system. So it's secure because we have immutable IDs and we have to control over 51% of the computing power in the blockchain network in order to start changing data that's immutably stored in the blocks that we've created. And it's encrypted, which is always helpful. It's also transparent. But ultimately, when we really get to the brass tacks, blockchain lets different third parties who are strangers to one another trust each other in a way that they couldn't have done before, without the need for an intermediary. And then just one more thing, smart contracts. So a smart contract is a kind of program that runs on the blockchain, and it only executes when predetermined conditions are met. So an example of this is if we have a blockchain transaction network. If you ship me a product, once I confirm I've received that product, proof of delivery, I tick a box on the driver's tablet, that kicks off a smart contract. And that smart contract executes automatically and takes the money, for example, out of my bank account automatically. So smart contracts give us a way to efficiently automate different transaction tasks, processes, and things. Now, I mentioned blockchain's energy problem. Now, we have lots and lots of different studies that are actually out there. This is sort of one of the latest ones, but getting this kind of information is typically very difficult. Today, it's estimated that the blockchain network is using 0.55% of all global energy. That's a tenfold increase, basically in the past 5 years alone. And that's actually more than the entire country of Sweden. And it keeps moving up the rankings, as you might imagine. Now, one of the ways that we can solve some of these problems is we can use renewable energy. So over 65% of the blockchain community today actually use some form of renewable energy. Bearing in mind, on the one hand, they try to do that because they're trying to stabilize and reduce their energy costs. Bearing in mind that when we have a look at the future of energy, which again is a different topic, the cost of energy generation from renewables is increasingly dropping to zero. But we also have minerless blockchains. So minerless blockchains, courtesy of organizations like IOTA, Microsoft, Accenture, there are a couple of them around. These actually, rather than using a proof of work to validate blocks, they use proof of authority. And then when we have a look at the Ethereum network has switched across to proof of stake, because proof of stake reduces the amount of electricity that they use by about 85 to 90%. So while blockchain has a lot of pros, it has some cons, but those cons are actually increasingly being innovated out by the blockchain ecosystem and community. And when we start talking about use cases, as I mentioned, blockchain is a general purpose technology, which means the number of use cases that I could be talking to you about today are almost unlimited. But these are some of my favorites. So for example, we can use blockchain to underpin central bank digital currencies. Ironically though, the vast majority of central banks think that they will use an alternative distributed ledger technology, but we can use blockchain to create CBDCs, and obviously we use blockchain to create cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, Dogecoin, and all these other fancy coins that we're actually seeing come out today, including Walmart coin and Facebook coin and Roblox coins and all these other things. Now, the benefit basically of these, shall we say, new digital currencies, if we want to sort of put it in that way, is they help with financial inclusion. So today, over 2 billion people don't actually have access to financial services, which means they can't get loans, they can't buy products, they can't buy houses, they can't start businesses, and so on and so forth. So CBDCs and cryptocurrencies actually give us a new way to help the unbanked, as sometimes they're called, be banked and gain access to the financial services ecosystem. They have low transaction costs, there are no intermediaries, as I say, like the SWIFT network. It's essentially programmable money. We can also use these technologies to analyze economies in real time. So for example, in Abu Dhabi, if there was a section of the Abu Dhabi economy that wasn't performing as expected, maybe it's the leisure and tourism part of the economy, you could instantly see that using a CBDC or a crypto or a blockchain. From a government perspective, you could then instantly enact policy changes to reduce the tax on hotel stays or whatever it happens to be in order to try to stimulate that economy. Now, this is one of the big benefits that the Chinese government actually sees with things like CBDCs and crypto and other bits and bobs. They also see real-time money transfers, and of course, they're secure. Now, when we have a look at some of the other use cases, we have the concept of distributed autonomous organizations, and these kind of mean different things to different people, but they're kind of broadly two types. So firstly, we can actually use blockchain combined with artificial intelligence and other RPA-like technologies, so robotic process automation-like technologies, to create fully autonomous organizations that are able to operate, run, and scale themselves without the need for any human involvement. There are about 15 of these at the moment. We see quite a number actually coming out of Hong Kong and actually Wall Street in the financial services community. Conversation for another time. But distributed autonomous organizations can also be holacratic. So a good example of this is crowdfunding, where people can come together basically to either buy parts of a particular NFT, like the American Constitution that went up for sale a little while ago. So we have this concept of the increasingly distributed autonomous organization, which changes not just how organizations are actually made, but how they're run, operated, scaled, basically who takes part in those organizations and so on and so forth. And that leads us into different conversations about the future of work and the workplace. Now, when we have a look at healthcare, blockchain is an ideal intermediary technology that actually helps us secure electronic patient records, so EHRs. We can also then use the blockchain to give different third-party providers access to patient data in a way that they wouldn't necessarily have been able to before. Government. So not only does blockchain provide everyone with a complete audit trail of everything that has actually gone on, but it allows secure data sharing between different government entities as well as the local citizens and population. Logistics. When we have a look at logistics, basically it enables the faster movement of goods, because on the one hand we can actually track those goods. As those goods come into customs, basically customs and regulators can actually look at the blockchain, understand what's on there, and then either autonomously approve the goods for transit, or do whatever they want to do. So we're seeing huge benefits when we actually have a look at using blockchain in the logistics industry with the likes of Maersk, for example, and companies like IBM. It also helps those logistics organizations reduce administrative overheads, but also allows them to save huge amounts of cost. Because when you think about the global logistics system, there's a huge amount of inefficiency. Robo-regulators. Now, one of the things that the Financial Conduct Authority in the UK is actually looking at is trying to create an automated and eventually autonomous robo-regulator for the UK fintech sector. Now, one of the ways that we can actually do this is we have blockchain as a rail. We take financial services regulations and we digitize those. We then set artificial intelligence on those regulations. So we use machine learning, which can interpret those regulations, understand what they mean and everything else. And we tie AI, in that case, and blockchain together. Now, what happens there is we can then start plugging different financial services institutions into our blockchain rail. And if they conduct particular types of business, if they try to perform particular transactions, that goes onto the blockchain, basically the robo-regulator then says no and just blocks it. So this is still quite a nascent area, but the use of blockchain and artificial intelligence and machine learning basically within the regtech industry is really quite an interesting one. So it'll be an interesting one to see how that actually pans out over the next decade, because again, that's going to be slow burn. Sovereign identity. So we have organizations like ID 2020 that are trying to use the blockchain to give everybody on Earth, especially the people who don't have access to verifiable sort of single versions of the truth about who they are, access to identity services. So again, today about 1.5 to 2 billion people today can't actually prove who they are, which means that they can't buy land, they can't buy property, they can't buy goods, they can't get access to the financial services system and so on and so forth. Now, when we have a look at sovereign identity, on the one hand, we can use blockchain to help give people, should we say, a digital ID based on biometrics or fingerprints, as we're seeing with India and so on and so forth. In addition to that, though, we can actually use these sovereign ID systems to help give people complete control over their data. Now, in this age of unprivacy, where privacy is almost becoming the issue of the decade, that's quite interesting. Because if I have a sovereign ID, then I can decide who sees my data. I can see what they're doing with my data, who they're sharing it with, and then I can rescind access. So sovereign ID systems are a very interesting new use case. And again, slow burn, but we're seeing governments like India starting to roll out sovereign ID systems of this kind to 1.2 billion people, and they might be the first, but they're certainly not going to be the last. And then supply chain transparency. Now, we have huge issues with the global supply chain today. There's a huge of inefficiency, there's a huge amount of cost. Blockchain can actually help us take that out. But I mentioned some of that during the logistics use case. Now, when it comes to supply chain specifically, blockchain can help us build new types of transparency into our supply chains. So for example, if I have a strawberry and that strawberry is being grown in Spain, I can print a tag or put a tag onto that strawberry using a 3D printer as that strawberry's been picked or whatever it happens to be. And we see that from the university, from Rice University over in the US. That tag contains all of the details about that particular strawberry. Where it was grown, the conditions it was grown under, the fertilizers it was given, the weed killers that were actually used, the amount of sunlight, We can have all kinds of information stored basically either in that crypto anchor or that RFID tag or that little tag basically that we put onto that product. Now, as that product travels through the supply chain, we can track everything about it. We can track the temperature that it was stored at in the truck, where it came from, where it went to. We can track it right to the person's stomach, ironically. However, if the user that buys that particular product, that strawberry, wants to understand the supply chain provenance of that particular strawberry, they can scan the tag using their phone, using NFC or whatever, or QRs, even if they want to do that, but you wouldn't really want to do that. And they can see everything about that strawberry. Now, when we talk about supply chain provenance, that's important because, for example, in Europe, a little while ago, a number of years ago, we actually had meat that everyone thought was minced beef that was actually minced horse. So from a recall perspective, having this kind of supply chain transparency not only lets consumers know everything about the particular product that they've bought, down to any level of granular detail, but if you do need to recall products, you don't recall entire batches. You can recall products by the individual barcode. So this is where, for example, Walmart basically have been building these systems out basically in the pork supply chain. And rather than having to recall all of the pork within all of their stores in a particular area, they can just recall specific packs. Saves a huge amount of money and effort when it comes to recalls. And that's it for now. So I'll be back having conversations with you about the future of crypto, NFTs, and of course the Metaverse. And now we go to questions. So thank you very much for listening. Take care.